Hello, this is Deborah Cohen. This is a story and a song where I delve and explore into the power of music, the universal language in our lives. And on a spiritual level, it is profound. Looking at the liturgical history in Judaism, of course, Christianity has its roots in Judaism. Therefore, this would be interesting to people that what can I say? People that are drawn to this spiritual element of life. It's a choice, yes, but there's also a drawing us in. After all, I was in a rock band in the 80s, and I was not even aware of any drawing from the spirit. I just wanted to rock and roll. But life happens to us, and at different times in our lives, we are all called or drawn closer to the Spirit. And it's our choice whether we choose to say, Hineni, here I am, or think, well, whatever that was. In God in His mercy, will keep calling you because He's looking for us all. After all, the Creator of the universe created each one of us. Okay, enough of that. But today, in part 2, I'm exploring the Tiberias chant because personally, I don't know why, but I am innately drawn, like that word drawn to the sound of a Yerushalmi chant. When I hear a chazzan or a cantor chant in that Middle Eastern sound, the actually Yemeni chant sounds quite similar, so does Iraqi, but the Jerusalem chant, I have wanted to learn this for years in studying Hebrew, and I'm still very elementary in my Hebrew, but I haven't been able to find a teacher yet. A lot of it in the past in my search has been because I'm not the right gender. Women, as we discussed last week, if you listen to part 1, women's voices were considered, I forget what the word was, but, not seductive in the church or the synagogue, but I'll have to go back and look at my notes and tell you after this brief message. So prepare to stick around for 30-ish minutes and we'll talk about the Tiberias chant. A Story and a Song podcast by Deborah Cohen. Interfaith Music. Every Sunday, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Books. Music. Singing for life. How songs elevate in praise. Deeper mysteries of the soul. For all creation. It's the golden age of praise. Singing from your heart and your soul. Music, stories, and merch, of course, on Amazon. A story and a song about life. And this is Deborah Cohen again, and the word I was looking for is promiscuous. In the beginnings of Temple Judaism or the Torah history, women were not really allowed to sing from the bima, or as Christians would say, the altar, the sanctuary, because the woman's voice was considered promiscuous. Well, I guess it could be because, as I mentioned last week, there are women that are up at the, not so much the bima, but I've seen, churches where the women are inappropriately dressed to lead worship. Because after all, if you're exposing certain parts of your body, then you're distracting people that have a weakness in that area. All right, but without further ado, let's have a sip of Java or whatever your sip is. And let's talk about the Tiberias system of cantillation. And I got this from liturgica.com. So if this piques your curiosity and you want to know more about it, you can go to that website. All ancient cultures, Rabbinic Judaism among them, preferred to chant their sacred texts rather than to recite them. Talmudic tradition holds that the cantillation of the Pentateuch was practiced even in the Second Temple. But by the way, if you don't know what cantillations, it's, singing to a learned melody called a nusach in Judaism. So it's not, you're just not doing spontaneous singing in the spirit. You're actually learning like I mentioned before the break, I would want to learn a Yerushalmi scale set to the words of Torah in order to pray. Praying and singing. Yes, that's my thing. That's my bag. Okay. All right. But various cantillation methods were crystallized only slowly during a period of over 800 years. The liturgical recitation of Scripture in the synagogue service demanded the setting of norms for the proper chanting of the text. Like I said, you don't just wing it. There's actually a learned nusach, or form, you could say, if you don't know what nusach is. The scrolls used for liturgical reading contained only an unpunctuated and unvocalized text, so that the slightest change of a vowel or a misunderstanding of the proper division of the verse could introduce a new and unwelcome meaning to the reading. On the other hand, marking the scrolls with any additional signs was forbidden. Thus, the right interpretation of the text had to be transmitted orally for many centuries. The invention of the codex, the bound book, introduced a change, because as I was talking before, we're saying when they use scrolls, where the written word was written on a scroll, but along comes the bound book, in that it became permissible to copy the sacred text into the codex with additional signs to aid the reader. One could not chant from the codex in public, but one could study the proper interpretation of the text from the bound book and memorize the signs in the codex before chanting them from the Torah scroll during services, or it might be a Haftorah scroll as well. From the 7th to the 9th century CE, various schools of grammarians in Babylonia and Palestine attempted to build a coherent system of symbols for the entire text of the Bible. These attempts culminated during the 9th century in the development of the most sophisticated system of the Jesuitic school of Tiberias. And if you don't know where Tiberias is, it's in Israel. The grammarians of this school defined 4 objectives for their system. 4. 1. To provide the text with proper vocalization. 2. To indicate to the reader what syllable to accentuate. 3. To divide and subdivide the verses according to syntactical and grammatical considerations. And 4. To indicate the desired musical patterns of the traditional chant. And I would like my traditional chant to be Yerushalmi. I like Turkish too, by the way. Okay, so these goals were achieved by furnishing the biblical text with the double system of nikud and te'amim. The nikud signs were written above, below, and inside the letters to indicate the vowels and the special pronunciation of some of the consonants. The te'amim signs were usually placed above or below the accented syllables, and they further divided and subdivided the verses, indicating the desired musical motives to which the text was to be chanted. The names and some of the graphical shapes of the te'amim were derived from hand motions known as chironomy. I'll see the gabbai in my synagogue standing at the bima, and the Torah reader is up there, and he's doing these hand movements. It looks like sign language, but it's actually for the person singing or chanting the Torah to cue them as to when to stop, go, and how to go up and down vocally and all that, which is really cool to watch. Okay. And actually, as it says, chironomy, chironomy, which was used by prompters, or the gabbai, to remind the reader of the appropriate musical patterns. The original Tiberias signs have been preserved in a few excellent manuscripts, codices of the 10th and 11th centuries, whence new editions of the Hebrew Bible are derived. Now, I know this is very complex, and if you're not interested in chanting the Torah or the Haftorah in Hebrew, this probably wouldn't be of any interest to you. But if you are, let's say, for example, a Christian listening, you might want to know a little bit about the Jewish history, which are the roots of Christianity. The Tiberias Masoretic system was universally accepted by all Jewish communities, but different musical interpretations of the te'amim developed through the ages. No community can claim today that it has preserved the ancient melodic patterns that were practiced by the Tiberian grammarians. Okay, 8 different regional traditions of cantillation coexist now. So I suppose each of the 8 says they're the right one or the original. Some of them, like the Yemenite, I love the Yemenite tradition, antedate the Tiberias system and ignore some of its components. Others, such as the Eastern European Ashkenazi tradition, follow the signs meticulously. This, however, does not mean that all the Ashkenazi musical patterns emerged from the theory of the te'amim was accepted by Europeans. On the contrary, some of their musical patterns developed much later, during the past 4 centuries. Selah, as I take a sip. Great. Within the 8th regional traditions, one can further identify more specific local styles of cantillations belonging to the various countries or districts of the region. So this is what I was saying in the beginning. I have an innate desire to learn the cantillations from Yerushalmi, or Yemeni, or maybe Turkish. And why is that? In addition, each of these traditions uses different musical systems for the various books of the Bible. Thus, for instance, the Eastern European Ashkenazi tradition, which is practiced in most synagogues in the United States, consists of 6 different musical systems. 1. Regular reading of the Pentateuch. 2. High holiday reading of the Pentateuch. 3. The Prophets. 4. The Scroll of Esther. 5. The Scrolls of Ruth, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastes. And 6. The Scroll of Lamentations. Since the liturgical reading of Scripture requires much knowledge and preparation, it is relegated in most Jewish communities to a professional reader called a Baal Kariah, literally a master of reading. Baal Kariah. Some communities of North Africa, Yemen, and Italy still follow the custom of using an assistant called a somech, whose hand motions prompt the reader. The early synagogue developed the role of prayer leader or precentor, a knowledgeable person who was, and it actually says man because apparently women, were still considered Their voices were considered promiscuous in the beginning. Okay, so let me say that again. I got something like, oh, there it is. Okay. All right. A knowledgeable man who was conceptualized theologically as serving as the agent of the congregation, the shaliach tzibur, in voicing the statutory liturgy before God. As a side note, I have been a co-leader, a shaliach tzibur, at a congregation, or synagogue, I should say, in Atlanta, Georgia. And I thank the rabbi there, Rabbi Rosenthal, and Rabbi Bluston for having the innovative acceptance of women at the bima. So though not necessarily possessing the most beautiful voice, the precentor was to be a paragon of learning and piety. Moreover, since prayer texts were transmitted orally until the 4th or the 5th century, precentors had to possess a strong memory for mandatory texts and an ability to improvise musical settings for them. The precentor chanted the prayers to simple traditional melodic patterns that developed locally but were then disseminated among other communities by wandering cantors. That's interesting. Now I can understand this synagogue that I was at visiting in Atlanta. It was a modern Orthodox synagogue, and they had a guest cantor from Mexico, and I didn't think to consider him as a wandering cantor, but he was wandering, and I loved his cantillation, and asked him if he would teach me, because it was in the melodies that I innately desire. And he was polite and said, yes, but the connection was never made. Too bad. Okay. Let me open my ears a little bit. When the professional cantor emerged as primarily a singer is not clear, though the rise of the specialized piyut may have been the primary factor, in that the piyut, being complex poetry, required specialized education on the part of anyone charged with chanting it. Then again, the distinctions in musical ability have always been the norm. Various passages of the Talmud require 2 precentors for the morning services, and it seems that the second one was usually the better singer. Nowadays, in the synagogues I've been in, it seems like the better voices is not a prerequisite for leading a service, and I just don't understand why not. Placing the better singer after a non-professional remains the custom today in most traditional Jewish communities, which still differentiate the lay precentor, or the Baal HaTefilah, the master of prayer, from a professional or semi-professional cantor, or chazzan. Whenever it was that the post of cantor developed into a primary musical role, good cantors were in great demand, and they went from community to community, shaping regional repertoires of melodies and melodic fragments that eventually crystallized into fixed patterns that individual communities viewed as sacred and obligatory. Early forms of such chants were preserved in all Jewish communities, but we can never be certain about the antiquity of any particular chant. Simple tunes may be ancient, or they may be later simplifications of more complicated chants. The synagogal chant repertoires are known as the collective noun, or nusach, which I mentioned earlier. It serves today as the entire repertory for the lay precentor, but as the mere basis for the liturgical recitative of the professional cantor, whose liturgical art is called chazzanut. It makes use of traditional melodic patterns, some of them fixed, others flexible or modular, in order to create an artistic musical expression of the form or content of the prayer. Particularly prominent in the Ashkenazi tradition, liturgical recitative involves some improvisation and artistic freedom. Yet at its best, it is firmly bound to traditional melodic formulas that in turn are connected to the liturgical function of the prayer and its calendrical setting. Well, we're talking about some big words here. And if you are trying to digest this as I'm reading, kudos to you, because this is complex understanding of what is expected of today's chazzan. Now, there are two types today in 2025. There is the cantor, and who has gone to college to be a cantor, rabbinic school, or there is the cantorial soloist, which I am a cantorial soloist. I learn more by ear and sheet music and have a layperson's background of Torah knowledge. In the Sephardi tradition, which my ear is for Sephardic, so here we go. But I'm in an Ashkenazi-based synagogue, so this is a future desire to be able to utilize the melodies that I hear from my foremothers. I won't say foremothers because it was forefathers. Foremothers weren't singing back then in the synagogue. I'm still looking for my hamakom, my place in the Sephardic sounding synagogue. In the Sephardi tradition, cantors tended to emphasize diction and accurate Hebrew pronunciation rather than vocal embellishment, where such ornamentation developed into chazzanut. However, as in the Ashkenazi synagogue, ambivalent feelings developed toward cantorial artistry. Yes, that is true today. At its best, chazzanut expresses sublimely religious sensitivity, even if the style is suspected of deteriorating into a display of cantonal vanity, and of opening the back door through which foreign melodies may infiltrate sacred worship, which is the case in Christianity. There's a lot of songs at the altar in the church that are written by popular Christian music artists, but they may not be adhering to the commandments. Let's just say it that way. Severe criticisms of chazzanut abound in the rabbinic literature of many countries and various periods from the 9th century to this day. So in this part 2 series, we're trying to understand and piece together this whole teaching through these episodes that are based on biblical music from the temple period in Judaism, of the Torah and the Haftorah. And I'm hoping to understand more why there is such resistance in today's synagogues for, let's say, somebody like me that has a heart to learn the Nusach, and the current cantor doesn't want to make a space for me. I'll just use me as an example. I'm being told that I need to be fluent in Hebrew before I can lead or co-lead. And I can understand that because you want to have proper pronunciation. And, it drives me nuts when I hear somebody that's in the United States, which is where I am, and usually it's a spam call, and the person on the phone has broken English, and I can't understand half of what they're saying because they're not learned. They maybe learn enough to get by, and somebody's merciful and gives them a job. And I'm like, what are you saying? Could you speak English, please? And they're saying, I speak English. I'm like, so you don't want to have that going on at the Bima, because it distracts people from deepening their prayer experience. So I understand that. So I need to learn the Nusach, and I thank God for Joey Weisenberg, who, collectively speaking, has created his website and a book, which I highly recommend to people, particularly in the Jewish synagogues, want or have a desire to learn the Nusach, or the forms of musical prayer in the synagogue. This book, The Torah of Music, by Joey Weisenberg, is wonderful because he has a website where you can learn all of these melodies and prayers online if your fellow gabbai or cantor won't help you. and it's taking a long time. Yes, because it's complex. Even what I just shared with you, I think, needs to be listened to twice in order to digest the entire teaching. And as you know, maybe you don't know, the average brain takes 3 repetitions to actually know the material. So, yes, I'm pretty average, I'd say. Anyway, there's more than one way to learn. And today, in this day and age, I'm thankful for that. But I just wish that cantors in school, the professional ones that go to college, would actually learn how to hold a note or sing and be in the same key at the end of the song, because that doesn't really happen a lot. They don't teach ear training. I don't understand that. Why would you want to get up in front of people and sound off key or horrible? Or maybe I know of a shliach zibor that doesn't know how to sing, so he chooses not to sing the liturgy, and he just kind of prays to himself, and he's up there praying with God, and kind of like we're just the congregation, but there's no interaction because he doesn't sing. And I'm like, the job of the chazzan is to get everybody together and to understand the process of the service and to lead us to a higher elevation. And unfortunately, even, I'm going to get on a roll now, but I'll just leave it here. Even I've noticed in the Musaf on Shabbat, to me that is the highest elevation of the service, but a lot of people in the synagogue consider it like, oh, good, we're getting closer to Oneg. No, that's not the cue for lunch. Musaf is not the cue for lunch. It's not the cue for, it's almost over. It's the cue to really open up to God and give God your all. And I love this service where I don't remember which synagogue it was, at the Musaf service, the chazzan or the rabbi or both call everybody who wants to go up to surround the bima while standing during Musaf to get closer to God. And the closeness and the singing and the prayers is so amazing. I wish we did that in our synagogue. It really helps people to understand that the Musaf is the grand finale of being in God's presence, at the Shekhinah. I wish. Okay, this is Deborah Cohen, a story and a song podcast. I hope you learned something, a takeaway, we call it in teaching. At the end of class, we'll ask the students, what was your takeaway? And you can put it in the chat if you want. I'm streaming on YouTube. The handle is @JewishRockMusic, or on Instagram, which doesn't always work, but my handle there is Deborah, Debra, Cohen, Cohen Music, Dotcom. So I thank you very much for listening today, and I hope I didn't get too wordy as I delve into this world, this crazy world we're in, and try to stay true to the Holy One of Israel. I thank you for listening, and until we meet again, I wish you peace, salam, and shalom.
LifeWave stem cell patches, non-transdermal, enhance sports performance, improve mental clarity, improve skin appearance and confidence, increase your vitality, faster recovery from exercise, and a good night's sleep. Try the patches today. lifewave.com/Marty Cohen.